There is no doubt in my mind, if I would ask any of my followers what is the best phone in terms of camera that held up, most of you would pick the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra. And I would fall under that as well, with it now being over 3 years old and still holding its own against the latest releases because of the provided hardware for the camera. But how does it stack up against the latest of Xiaomi themselves, against the new Ultra, the Xiaomi 14 Ultra? Well, that is what we are going to find out today. This is the comparison between the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra and the newly released Xiaomi 14 Ultra. Let's see how they stack up against each other. But before we start this detailed comparison, let's look at the camera specifications for both. On the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra we have a 15 megapixel main sensor, which is the GN2, which is 24mm equivalent. It has an f-stop of 2.0 and a 1/1.12 inch sensor size, which is very large for phones releasing back then and why it is still relevant. We get a 48 megapixel periscope with an f-stop of 4.1, 120mm equivalent, and here again a larger 1/2 inch sensor size, and yes, this is bigger than what you get on a 14 Ultra. And then finally a 48 megapixel ultra wide with an f-stop of 2.2, 12mm equivalent, and again a large sensor with it being 1/2 inch sensor size as well. And yes, you are correct, again the sensor is bigger than what you get on the 14 Ultra for the ultra wide. Now let's move to the 14 Ultra. We get a 50 megapixel main sensor, which has the LYT900 sensor. It's a 1 inch sensor with variable aperture between 1.63 and 4, and it is 23mm equivalent. Then we have a 50 megapixel with an f-stop of 1.8, which is the telephoto, and that's the floating lens. It has a sensor size of 1/2.51 inch sensor size and 75mm equivalent, but we won't be using this because the Mi 11 Ultra doesn't have equivalent lens for that. We get a 50 megapixel periscope with an f-stop of 2.5, which does allow more light to be captured to the sensor itself because it is a 4.1 on the Mi 11 Ultra. It's 120mm equivalent and it has a sensor size of 1/2.51. And then the last one, the ultra wide. We get a 50 megapixel sensor yet again and an f-stop of 1.8, and it's 12mm equivalent, and again a smaller sensor size compared to the Mi 11 Ultra with a 1/2.51 inch sensor size. In terms of video recording, we can go all the way up to the useless 8K and 24 frames per second on the Mi 11 Ultra and 4K up to 60 frames per second. And then for the 14 Ultra, we can also go all the way up to 8K, however in 30 frames per second. But the more useful one is the 4K and 120 frames per second on the 14 Ultra that the Mi 11 Ultra doesn't have. Now of course these are numbers and you can look at that and kind of decide, but realistically, there's far more than just these numbers that makes up the image. But with that out of the way, let's dive into the video. And also don't forget to comment below, that helps out the video because it takes time and comments helps, and of course push it more up for the algorithm and so on. But next to that, I do really like to have discussions about your preferences and see what you think about the differences between the styles. Either way, let's dive into this video and don't forget to take a popcorn because this is going to be a long one. And we are starting with this 5x zoom, and realistically both shots are really close to each other and it's a bit hard to pick between the two. The Mi 11 Ultra has a bit more sharpening going on, but in some parts also feels a little bit more detailed. The 14 Ultra is a bit softer and that helps with the more natural look between the two. Like for instance the flowers themselves, where the Mi 11 Ultra looks a bit sharper, especially if you get a little bit closer to the shot itself. Both shots are good and it's hard to pick between the two here. Looking at this shot, the difference is more noticeable. Here I prefer the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. It has a bit more contrast on the shot itself, and the shot is a bit less bright, more close to what it was in reality. But the Mi 11 Ultra did a very solid job with both having a good natural depth of field on the main sensor shot. Now we go back to the 5x zoom, with again both shots looking very similar and both being excellent. While there are some slight difference in contrast and the gold color itself, I think both shots look amazing and captured the details really well here. I prefer the 14 Ultra because it has that slightly more photography kind of style, but the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra still holds up really well. Same position again with the main sensor, and again the Mi 11 Ultra simply holds up well against the 14 Ultra. Details are excellent in both and overall are well captured. though I do prefer the 14 Ultra here because of the bit more contrast and the natural colors. Now with the main camera again looking at this scooter shot, we can see it's a pretty clear difference in terms of colors between the two. The red feels deeper on the 14 Ultra, where on the Mi 11 Ultra the image looks a little bit flatter. Also there's a bit of depth of field on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, where the Mi 11 Ultra doesn't have that. Now for the ultra wide shot, I will say the angle isn't perfect. So there's a little bit of a composition difference, but the shot was taken on the same position. The 14 Ultra looks a little bit warmer compared to the Mi 11 Ultra, with again a bit more contrast and overall a bit more natural looking shot. Though I would say I prefer the greens on the Mi 11 Ultra. They look less saturated than on the 14 Ultra, but the contrast and the overall shot I do prefer on the 14 Ultra. Now looking at this shot with the main sensor, again a clear difference between the contrast. For me the clear winner here is the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. The contrast gives the Xiaomi 14 Ultra shot more depth, and in general I do really like that better. Just look at how more detailed it feels as well. The Mi 11 Ultra does well in terms of details, but because of the brighter approach it looks a little bit flat. And again, same position, but this time with the Ultra. Now the Mi 11 Ultra has some more contrast compared to the main sensor, and it helps the shot out. I would say the shots are really close to each other. But then, we look at the sky. The Mi 11 Ultra clearly has the better dynamic range when it comes to the sky, where the 14 Ultra is overexposed. But apart from that, in terms of color, they look really similar. But naturally, the Mi 11 Ultra here wins because of handling the sky better. Now periscope shot again between the two, and we get to repeat what I said before, because the Mi 11 Ultra looks a little bit flatter because of the lesser contrast, and also is a little bit more noisy. The Mi 11 Ultra did do a good job here, but I would say that the 14 Ultra wins here. Now again, an ultra wide shot between the two. The Mi 11 Ultra is the one again with the better dynamic range. The skies are blown out on the 14 Ultra, where the Mi 11 Ultra really captures the source of the light really well. Though with that being said, a part of the image looks a little bit washed out, and the Mi 11 Ultra does have a slight lens flare, but nothing really disturbing. But out of the two, because of this, I would say that I prefer the Mi 11 Ultra shot here, and that's mainly because of the sky itself. Now a quick shot of myself, nice and awkward. The Mi 11 Ultra doesn't really have good portrait possibilities. They are very limited, especially if you compare it to the 14 Ultra. You have different focal lengths you can use on the 14 Ultra for portrait shot. We do not have that option on the Mi 11 Ultra. But here, in terms of skin color, the Mi 11 Ultra looks more appealing. The 14 Ultra for some reason really struggles capturing my skin color well. If I try to take a shot of myself, that is. And it's only then, because if I capture shots of others, I don't have that issue. But if I try to take a shot of myself, sometimes my skin simply looks dead. Now we are at a different location, Paardvermarken in the Netherlands. I have showcased this before, but let's see how they stack up in different settings. And let's start at the lighthouse. Straight away I would say there are some slight differences in terms of colors. The Mi 11 Ultra has a bit more warmth to the shot compared to what you get in reality, where the Xiaomi 14 Ultra captured that better. But in terms of details with this periscope shot, I would say that the Mi 11 Ultra does feel a little bit more detailed, in particular for this shot. Here we have an ultra wide shot for both, and the Mi 11 Ultra clearly has some saturation going on, and it's the brighter image. For me, here clearly the 14 Ultra wins. It has more of a photography approach with a bit more contrast, and the colors are closer to reality. But the Mi 11 Ultra again did do a really solid job here. For this beach with the rocks itself, shots are pretty similar with the main sensor, but the 14 Ultra does capture a bit more detail, slightly more contrast, where the Mi 11 Ultra has a bit more saturation compared to the 14 Ultra and compared to reality, which again did do a good job, but for me here the 14 Ultra wins. Here we are moving to the ultra wide again, but the 14 Ultra here for me wins. It just looks better. Parts of the Mi 11 Ultra look a little bit washed out, even more so on the rocks itself, and it has a little bit of a haze to it. In terms of contrast, the 14 Ultra also looks more appealing with more details, though it has a bit more sharpening going on than what I would like on the 14 Ultra. Now just before we start moving to video recording, let's shortly change the scenery again. In this shot with the main sensor, both have a nice natural depth of field, but the Mi 11 Ultra does have that brighter shot approach with less contrast and more saturation, where the 14 Ultra really looks like a photography approach with some nice contrast to it. And using the 2x zoom on both, it isn't really close. While both have a nice depth of field, the Mi 11 Ultra just lacks that image quality that you would get on the 14 Ultra, which also again has the nicer contrast. Last one here using the ultra wide, and again it seems that the Mi 11 Ultra has the better dynamic range control when it comes to the sky. In terms of colors, the 14 Ultra is a bit closer. It did have a bit of a warmer look when I was there, and the Mi 11 Ultra just looks a bit colder than reality, as well as having a bit more saturation on the greens. The 14 Ultra does feel also a little bit more detailed out of the two. Hi, both the Xiaomi 14 Ultra and Mi 11 Ultra are recording in 4K 60 frames per second. Xiaomi 14 Ultra is too sharp, but the colors are a little bit more close to reality. The Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra definitely has some saturation going on. Benefit, however, for the 14 Ultra is I can zoom out in this resolution where I cannot with the Xiaomi. I can also zoom in to the 3.2 times and the 5 times. Again, the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra cannot. Contrast is also better on the Xiaomi, but definitely it's a tad too sharp on the Xiaomi for me. So sharpness, definitely the Mi 11 Ultra wins. That is something that really needs addressing. Alright, so the Mi 11 Ultra is limited to 8K 24 frames per second, where the 14 Ultra can record 8K 30 frames per second. But we're gonna make it the same 8K 24 frames per second on both. Of course, it's gonna be jittery. I think the same rule applies with contrast, sharpening, and everything. Now with 4K 30 frames per second, the Mi 11 Ultra does gain the zooming out, and of course the 14 Ultra can as well. The zooming in is always hard to say, and of course I have to do it via slider. Let's see if yes, zooming in also works. As you can see, quality change. 4K 30 frames per second. Again, the Xiaomi 14 Ultra for me seems too sharp. In terms of colors, at least on the phone, very similar in this case. A little bit more contrast on the Mi 11 Ultra, which I actually prefer. While the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra cannot zoom out in 4K 30 frames per second, you can record just going to the ultra wide in 4K 60 frames per second. Sorry. And then have the possibility to record like that. You just cannot change it in terms of lenses while recording. But again, this is like quite an old phone for mobile standards these days. Now, when I was in Belstein, of course, when it comes to comparison, it was a bit cloudy and a bit rainy at the end, so you get a very different look. The Mi 11 Ultra is quite a lot more saturated than the 14 Ultra. The 14 Ultra, without a doubt, is the more realistic one. So to make a fair comparison, 1080p on both, 60 frames per second on both, to see how they both perform. I would say Xiaomi definitely, when it comes to the front-facing camera, has more overexposure, problems on the background, to the point when both of the hands are being used. Display visibility is about the same, by the way, so it doesn't feel like the Xiaomi 14 Ultra is much brighter at the moment. When it comes to colors, Xiaomi 14 Ultra is better. Definitely got a lot of softening going on the Mi 11 Ultra as well. Now 4K 60 frames per second on both. Now you might be wondering why the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra can record 4K 60 frames per second. Technically, you can use the rear display to frame yourself with it, where of course with the Xiaomi 14 Ultra you do not have that feature. So you're using the main sensor. It's a difference and a little bit cheating, but it is something that is worth noting when it comes to the Mi 11 Ultra. That feature is something that you're missing on the 14 Ultra, and you cannot frame yourself. Yeah, you can try, but you cannot see the result itself. So definitely something to keep in mind when it comes to the Mi 11 Ultra. That feature is unique and useful, especially if you love recording yourself. So quick recap of daytime photography, and I would say that both of these phones perform well. The Mi 11 Ultra goes more for that saturated bright look, and if you like that, then that phone does really well. But if you like more of that photography approach, the 14 Ultra is the better one. Yes, the Mi 11 Ultra sometimes has better dynamic range, especially when it comes to the ultra wide, but we clearly see some shots where the Mi 11 Ultra performs better there. But overall, the 14 Ultra just is the better performer for me. With that being said, it needs to work on its consistency, especially when it comes to sharpening, because that clearly can be too much on some shots. Either way, let's move to low light and showcase how both of them perform there. With this light shot, I would say the Mi 11 Ultra looks a bit artificial. The light itself is not really smooth, even more so looking at the pole itself. But in turn, it does have less glare using the main sensor on both. Then let's move to the 5x zoom, and the Mi 11 Ultra is pretty well detailed. The colors are a bit similar, and while the Mi 11 Ultra is pretty solid, the 14 Ultra does have the better dynamic range control, and I love the contrast on the 14 Ultra, and I prefer it out of the two. Looking at this shot, the 14 Ultra definitely feels more detailed, less sharpening and the more pleasing shots and nicer reds, albeit a bit too saturated, as well as the lens flare being more on the Mi 11 Ultra. With this building shot again, I would say I picked the 14 Ultra pretty easily. This is more because of the vibe and feel it creates. On authentic, it gets that proper night view. With the Mi 11 Ultra, it goes for more of that bright approach that simply doesn't have my preference. And the contrast and colors are also closer on the 14 Ultra. With the main shot again, there is a bit of a difference in approach again. The Mi 11 Ultra looks a lot colder and also the brighter in general. And in terms of the dynamic range, the light on the building is better on the Mi 11 Ultra, as well as the street light. Though the colors are better on the 14 Ultra, with it being closer to reality, as well as that night feel again that is better captured on the 14 Ultra. Using the main sensor again, I would pick the 14 Ultra. It gives the better night feeling, it has less of a bright approach and a nicer contrast. With that being said, the Mi 11 Ultra does a pretty good job here as well, but it does suffer a bit in terms of details, though the 14 Ultra on some parts feels too sharp. For this shot, I'm using the main camera again on this fountain, and a clear difference of approach, and a great example between the difference of photography and mobile photography and what a lot of phones do wrong. The Mi 11 Ultra is that bright shot with grey sky and loses that feel of the night itself, where on the 14 Ultra we see a nice night shot, harder shadows, more contrast, and overall the better shot for me. If you want a bright approach, the Mi 11 Ultra has done a pretty solid job, though it does suffer from a slower shutter speed compared to the 14 Ultra. Zooming in 5 times with the periscope. Ignore the color difference because simply put, this fountain keeps changing from colors. And again, I would say this is a pretty easy win for the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. It's clearer, more detailed, and on the Mi 11 Ultra it has a lot of parts where it's soft and lacks details, though the water looks pretty solid. Using the 5x zoom on this rainy day again, it clearly isn't a competition. The 14 Ultra is far more detailed, captured the scene better, and it has that night feel again, albeit it's a bit too sharp as well. The Mi 11 Ultra doesn't do very well here compared to the 14 Ultra. Using the main sensor on both here, and while I think both did a pretty solid job capturing the scene again there's a difference in terms of approach. The 14 Ultra clearly captures that feel of the night yet again, and just more of a photography approach compared to the Mi 11 Ultra, but I think for both they've done a pretty solid job, though my preference has the 14 Ultra. Now when using the ultra wide shot, they look scary similar. Both have their bit of odd soft spots, both look too soft in general. Though granted, there's hardly any light here and it's a very hard condition to capture this kind of shot. But I think for both, they've done a really good job for the difficulty of the shot. However, there isn't one that fully stands out for me, so I don't really have a pick between the two here. Now another shot with the main sensor between the both. The 14 clearly has the more contrast again. It has better light control and the colors look more like it was in reality. The Mi 11 Ultra seems at some points to have this yellow hue on top of the image itself, which clearly isn't the reality, and also has a bit more lens flare as well. Now this shot just happened to present itself randomly, with having this random table with the lights on there. I would say the colors are a little bit between the two in terms of that light source. The blue was a bit more towards the Mi 11 Ultra, but not by that much. But the 14 Ultra clearly captured the more details in this shot. As well as that yellow hue again on the Mi 11 Ultra is a bit overboard. Also see how much more natural depth of field you have between the two. The 14 Ultra of course has that larger sensor and a bigger f-stop as well. Looking at the bridge shot here with the main sensor, again the feel of night is far better captured on the 14 Ultra, as well as having better control of the light sources compared to the Mi 11 Ultra. Colors are closer to reality on the 14 Ultra as well. Where the purple was mostly gone with the Mi 11 Ultra, there was still a little bit of that purple hue in there. Again, we have a light source here that shifts a little bit, but there was still a little bit of purple the moment that I captured the shot itself with the Mi 11 Ultra, which it didn't manage to capture. Here with the main sensor, and the Mi 11 Ultra and the 14 Ultra look very similar. I would say the 14 Ultra has a bit more contrast to the shot itself and a bit better control of the details itself, but the approach looks very similar between the two. However, I would also say that the 14 Ultra has made the image a bit too sharp. Now here, an ultra wide shot. Again, I would say that again the night view is captured better on the 14 Ultra. With that being said, the light on the building is far harsher, giving the Mi 11 Ultra more visible detail, as well as the water here being captured better. The 14 Ultra, it looks very soft at that water spot, where the Mi 11 Ultra managed to capture more of the details in the water itself. Now using the 5x zoom again, and here I would say the Mi 11 Ultra feels a bit more detailed. It captures the drops a bit better between the two, but again in terms of feel the scene is closer to reality on the 14 Ultra. Now with this shot again, we just go for the same routine. The 14 Ultra captures the feel of the night far better. It feels more of a photography shot, where on the Mi 11 Ultra it feels more like that mobile photography shot. It's brighter, more exposed, and if you like it, the Mi 11 Ultra has done well here, but my pick would be the 14 Ultra. And here at the same spot using the ultra wide, the 14 Ultra looks very soft. It lacks a little bit of detail because of it, where the Mi 11 Ultra captured the scene better. Though granted, it is a bit too sharp as well from that side of the team. Moving to the last two before we showcase video. I would say the 14 Ultra again captures that feel better of the night itself. It also has that better light control, but I would say that the Mi 11 Ultra has done an excellent job here as well. While it doesn't retain that night feel as much as it did on the 14 Ultra, it isn't off by far, and I think it's a pleasing shot from the Mi 11 Ultra. And then we move to the ultra wide here for one last time, and I feel like the Mi 11 Ultra is a bit sharper, a bit more detail between the two. In terms of colors, I would say it's a little bit in between. It's more towards the 14 Ultra, but not by that much. Again, both are a little bit off in terms of the color, but not that much. .4K 60 frames per second on both the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra and the 14 Ultra. The Mi 11 Ultra definitely looks more hazy, like it's trying to get too much light in. If we ignore that part, it is rainy, so that could be that the lens on this one is a little bit more affected than the 14 Ultra. Of course, again, you cannot zoom out on the Mi 11 Ultra, but you can, just give it a second, on the 14 Ultra, where you cannot on the Mi 11 Ultra. And of course zoom in as well. 4K 30 frames on both. The approach looks a little bit similar. I will say 14 Ultra seems a bit sharp. Is that too sharp? Doesn't have my preference. Again, it's raining and I'm soaking wet, but that's beside the point. All for the content. Of course, you can zoom out now with the Mi 11 Ultra. It's really hard to control in this rain, and you can see there's a drop on my lens now, so I cannot control that. So I just ignore that part, and now on the 14 Ultra, but just to showcase a little bit on how they approach it. Of course, front-facing camera, 4K 60 frames on the 14 Ultra. We do not have that option on the Mi 11 Ultra. Xiaomi took a long time to get that option in their phones. I will switch to 1080p on the 14 Ultra as well to see how it performs then. Right, 1080p, both 60 frames per second. Don't know why the Mi 11 Ultra got so much darker. Again, there's a bit of rain, as you can tell, to showcase the difference. Putting in a little bit of light now. Let's see how they stack up against each other in terms of light. I keep getting microphone blocks on 14 Ultra. See if that affects on here. Could be the case. Don't know. That is the case then. But then of course it's something that they didn't really thought through. So the 14 Ultra is of course the latest release from Xiaomi, but the Mi 11 Ultra isn't a slouch here. What they did when that phone came out was really impressive. The hardware still holds up really well, and the Mi 11 Ultra of course has that unique feature of the rear display that no other phone really has, at least not to my knowledge from what I know and remember. But when it comes to the Mi 11 Ultra, that uniqueness is still there, and that makes it such a nice phone to have. And in terms of camera, it captures beautiful shots still, albeit a little bit more of that brighter and saturated shot that I talked about before. When it comes to photography on the 14 Ultra, it's a different kind of beast, and I like what Xiaomi is doing. That being said, there are some things that the Xiaomi 14 Ultra needs work on, the sharpening and so on, that I discussed before. But overall, I would say that for me, the 14 Ultra definitely wins. In low light as well, it captures more of the soul of low light photography, and there the 14 Ultra just stands above the Mi 11 Ultra. That being said, again, if you like that more brighter shot, then the Mi 11 Ultra still does a really good job overall when it comes to low light photography. And it's a phone that will hold up quite well for some time. Heck, it still competes against phones from the current releases. Heck, it beats, for instance, the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Well, don't know about the latest updates of it because it's already gone for me. But when it comes to just the general performance of the Mi 11 Ultra, it's done really well. There are some things, however, that it lacks. It doesn't have the same freedom with portrait. It doesn't have the same freedom when it comes to the styles as well, because I definitely prefer the styles on the 14 Ultra. But overall, the Mi 11 Ultra is still a beast and still holds its own really well. But it does get beaten by the 14 Ultra. Either way, let me know what you think about this comparison. Let me know what you think about the Xiaomi 14 Ultra versus, of course, the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra. And which one has your preference? Do you like more of the photography style and therefore the 14 Ultra? Do you like more of that brighter, a bit more saturated shot? Then what do you think? Does the Mi 11 Ultra beat the 14 Ultra for you? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, if you did enjoy the video, don't forget to subscribe. We're getting really close to the 10,000 subscribers. We're 7,600 at the moment. So we're getting really close to that 10,000 subscriber mark. And would really appreciate it if you subscribe if you aren't yet. And of course, liking the video and commenting below definitely helps out with just growing the video in general. Either way, have a good one and talk to you guys in the next